I love watching my sisters with their grandkids flitting around, but I'm happy watching them with their grandkids flit. I don't know what it would have been like. I don't know the deep inner lives that they're leading. I do know that they're all dedicated to their kids. And my bandwidth is wider than that. And I have young people in my life that I'm very, very, very close to. And I talked about going to the schools. I have had and will have young people in my life always.
I'm Kelty McGuire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Kids Are Childfree podcast, where I'm going to be talking with a friend of mine, Kate Kaufmann, who is somebody just incredible that I've come to get to know over this last year. And I'm really excited to bring you this conversation because Kate is in her 70s. And part of where I really struggled when I was making the Kids Are Childfree decision, and when I was also looking for more confidence in my child-free choice, once I decided, was I did not see that many examples of women who had lived decades and decades of their life not having had kids. As it stands right now, if you're a woman in your late 20s or 30s or maybe early 40s, there's a pretty good chance that you know what it's like not to have kids because guess what? You don't have any right now. Whereas we can only surmise what it might be like to be a woman without kids in our 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. And Kate just has so much wisdom to share and stories to tell. And I am just really thrilled to get into this conversation with her today. But before we do so, I want to share a little bit about Kate and her background. Kate is an international award-winning author of Do You Have Kids? Life When the Answer Is No, who advocates for better understanding of the childless and child-free demographic in person, on air, and in print. Kate's a popular speaker, media guest, and conversation starter who has an MFA in creative writing and professional background in human resources and consulting. Outlets where her work has been featured include NBC, CBC Radio, Psychology Today, and The Washington Post. Her mission is to open doors to frank, respectful conversations between the childless and child-free, as well as among parents, non-parents, and those whose futures are yet unclear. Welcome to the podcast, Kate. All right, Kate Kaufmann, thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure. It's exciting.
Yes, I'm very excited for this conversation. Every time the two of us connect, it's always, just a really impactful discussion that we have. So I'm really excited to be bringing this to our listeners today. Right off the top, I would love for people to just hear a little bit about who you are, and then let's get straight into it. I want you to tell us about your Kids Are Childfree decision, which is maybe not as straightforward as some. So take it away, Kate.
I'm happy to do that. And my new thing that I'm referring to myself as is the Unabashed Elder. And so my job
I love it.
is what others have done for me, which is just to give the straight story and be as honest and kind as I can be. So there.
Wonderful.
And I'm the author of Unabashed. Here's an example. Do you have kids? Life When the Answer Is No. And then there's
Awesome.
other translations that are just tickled me.
Perfect. And for those who are listening to the recording and not watching the video, Kate was just showing us her beautiful book, which has a very striking cover. And yes, Do You Have Kids? Life When the Answer Is No. We'll hear more about it today, but highly suggest picking up a book. So continue. I want to make sure I give you my props as well.
Okay, good. And so when the cover that I flashed has something that's very meaningful to me in the texture on the cover, and that is a topographical map that shows some paths. Because what we're doing, and I love that you're doing this podcast, because the path that we're traveling, it occurred to me that as girls, we travel the path and we're asked to either figure out, or it's figured out for us, what direction we're going to take, what spurs we're going to take off the trail. But we all start on the same trail. And I find that really helpful. And my path was kind of twisty-turny, and I'm kind of surprised when you say it wasn't as straightforward as others, because what I've heard is that more of us are ambivalent and we just need a nudge in a direction or another. And mine might not have been straightforward because I went through all the options. I pretty much, from raising my younger sisters, which they would argue with, and babysitting every kid on the block, I started out more child-free. And then I shifted over into, for a very superficial reason, which we can go into, but I went through infertility stuff, and then came out of it and had to integrate all that experience. And today consider myself a child-free elder.
Okay. I like that you sort of call me out in a loving way for me saying it's, I guess, perhaps different, more winding, unexpected, because, and this is part of why, of course, I've created this podcast, is we have this assumption, I think, when we go into this decision that A, in many cases, there's no decision to be made at all. We're just simply going to go try and have children. But B, that the decision is simple. And for most of us, it's not. And there is a lot of ambivalence and there are a lot of twists and turns. And I suppose I refer to that because you will have been the first guest that we've had on that did go down that path of trying to have kids and then decided, okay, that's not actually what I want. So lead us up and through that decision. You, first of all, and I also want to clarify, because I won't have shared this in the introduction, as an unabashed elder, people maybe listening aren't sure. So how old are you, Kate?
I'm 71 years old.
71 years old today. Okay. And so you tell us a little bit about your younger years and like coming into this place where you thought, okay, I'm going to have a family.
My younger years were years of exploration, that path metaphor. My goodness, that just describes my life. I went along one route thinking I was going to go to law school, and then I worked in a law firm, and it's like, no, I'm not going to go to law school. Anyway, I ended up in the corporate world, went through my heavy type A period. Oh, and I was in human resources. So I dealt with a lot of people and issues and figuring stuff out. And so I've always been someone who figures stuff out. Had you been at my bedside table during my early to late 30s, you would see titles like Beyond Motherhood, Without Child, Baby Maybe, and all these things that I was reading. I married when I was 30. And we entered into that marriage saying, I don't know. And
Okay.
when I mentioned earlier that I think people tend to have a little more twisty-turny, what I also learned when I was talking to women for my book was that the experience of not making a decision was a way to make a decision in and of itself.
I agree.
Of course, because we've got our biology, except that you can put your eggs away now. Which makes it, I can't even imagine having that element of it to complicate matters. So I went through infertility after a friend decided that she was going to go for kids. And this is where I said it was superficial. Dan and I looked at each other. It's like, well, what else are we going to do with our lives? Why don't we give it a go? And then because I was a type A, it became something that I needed to do. I was always very much physically oriented, and I wanted to have the physical experience of birthing a child. But I do believe now, only in hindsight, I could not have seen this, that the quest for the pregnancy became the superordinate goal. And I stopped thinking about it and how it fit anymore.
Yeah. And so it sounds like, a couple of things I want to point out that you said. I totally agree with this idea that not making the decision, or I often hear about women saying like, we're not trying. Then you are effectively trying, or I think it's maybe a way to sort of like temper our expectations and to not make a full commitment to say, I'm going to be okay regardless, which there's something theoretically good about this idea of like, let's see what life will bring us. But as you say, it still is a decision. So you thought like, let's see if a child comes into our lives. Let's see if we go down this path, how it is. Was it no question when you weren't able to conceive that you would do fertility treatments, or was that obviously there was a decision there, but how did that discussion go? And what made you decide, yes, we want to pursue this further?
The first thing that occurs to me was the lack of success. Like, all right, I can always work around barriers. That's what my stock and trade is. And so I'll work around this barrier, and continued on. And then by then, I think what happened is that I was very much romanticizing how this whole thing would go. That this would happen. Ideally, it would happen in this month because I've got this stuff that's coming down the pike at work, blah, blah. And it didn't happen. And so then it became truly one of the first things And probably the biggest thing that I tried to do in my life that I was not successful
And again, you say that this is only in hindsight. So I'm curious, first of all, when in your life do you think you came to this sort of realization that, wow, this trying to have a baby was about more than trying or wanting to have a child. It was also about me succeeding, me doing the thing. Do you remember when that realization dawned on you? Has it been gradual? Was it, I don't know, in your 50s, 60s? Has it been in the last year? When did that happen?
Oh, there were two key things. One, the next step in the infertility treatment was IVF. And I remember when I learned about genetics in high school and stuff, it's like, okay, well, there's a moment, there's a bridge too far. And the idea of having, and I know it runs the gamut for people, but for me personally and for my husband then, that was taking it too far. There was something in there. There's something else I'm supposed to do with my life. And then the other was I've been a rabid journal keeper since probably my early 20s. And during COVID, I ended up rereading a bunch of my journals. And I can see that I was ambivalent from the start. I didn't think that it was going to matter to me. And then having to face my own words that, wow, you really invested in this.
Yeah.
But it was more about success and tenacity. So the potential for IVF was like a shot of reality that this is what is going to happen. Are you really with the program?
And is that then where you decided to say, no, we're not going to go down that path?
Yes.
Okay. And so first of all, I'm curious to know, I think, even when we feel alone in our experience, we're thankful for one of only a few, there's usually many of us. Do you think that it can become, we'll say, somewhat easy for people to become so invested in this process of trying to have children that they almost can lose sight of the end goal itself? And it becomes, as you said, really about trying to achieve, trying to accomplish, being successful, all the markers of this is what we're designed to do. I've now failed, whatever meaning making there is for people. Do you think that's common, that a lot of people get kind of sidetracked by that secondary piece of, oh no, I'm not successful, versus, oh no, I couldn't have a baby? Or I guess I'm wondering, do you think you're alone in that? Or is that something that you see perhaps happening in other people?
I know now that I was not and am not alone. None of us are. Then for sure, nobody talked about it. I didn't know anybody, or actually the truth is I probably didn't think about it hard enough, because later on down the path, I started to reflect on how many people I knew who either didn't have kids or who went through challenges in order to have kids. And then that's what was the genesis for me doing a major exploration that took me to where I am today.
And so I'm curious if you could kind of, I find it interesting because you decided not to pursue things further. You've shared that your identity shifted quite a bit. And so I'm curious to kind of hear a little bit about that journey, from the point of saying, we're not going to pursue this. I have to assume that would have been difficult and there was grief attached to that experience. Was it hard? Yeah.
It was
Tell me a little
hard.
bit about that.
Yeah, I was part of, we started to go to Resolve, which is the infertility organization. I think it's worldwide. And many of the people in our particular group were successful. I ended up getting a counselor. At the time, I was actively involved with the church. I went to go talk to the people at the church because you don't fit in the church, and everything's all about celebrating birth. And where I really went was, there was a confluence of a number of things. My dad died partway through. My uncle died, blah, blah, blah. All these things happened. And so I had to go deeply within. Whereas previously I had been more externally approval, expectations, give me a goal and I will achieve them. I had to go inside and say, what really am I going to do now? And one of the things I came away with was I have invested a lot in buying, just if it were to happen, a house in a good school district, to have a job that was so stressful. At the time we were doing de-staffing and laying people off, and that was one of my expertises. It was just too much. It's like, well, why are we doing this? We don't need to save for college that we're not going to buy. So we actually threw in the towel, bought a little piece of property out in a rural area, and started raising sheep. That was the response. It was pretty radical.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it sounds like you'd consciously or unconsciously been planning for one kind of life, even though you'd said, well, let's just kind of wait and see. And I do think when we're at this crossroads, and for you just making the decision, like that's enough. That's as far as I'm taking this. This isn't necessarily what I want, or at least not, to go through these means to get there. Really having to reevaluate and ask yourself, what do I want my life to be and look like? And building it again from the ground up, looking at where you're living, what you're doing, what your surroundings are. How is that move for you? How is raising sheep and living on a small farm or property?
Well, first of all,
big farm.
I mean, it was a weird choice to make because you go land in a rural area and you're surrounded with people who have kids and are very family oriented. I started volunteering at the local school, helping the kids to read at the primary grades. I was truly reforming my life. And one thing that I've reflected on that's germane to your question is I see now that for me, and a friend pointed this out, it's like every 7 to 10 years, I repot myself and have a new chapter with overlapping but distinct content and focuses. And I'm actually in one of those shifts right now. And it's really interesting now to sit in it and go, it's just what's happening, and to give the space to adjust to whatever may come.
It sounds like it's been a journey. And I'm glad that you speak to after making the decision not to pursue fertility treatments. I'm sure maybe for listeners, having first heard that, it's like, okay, well, it sounds like really like, well, it didn't happen. Okay, moving along. Like, this is, of course, looking back at your life. And this is probably, I'm guessing, like 30, 40 years ago. This is like the abridged version, very abridged. But it was a loss. There was a grieving process. I'm sure there was a big questioning. It's like, okay, because you said to yourself, when you talked about the friend of yours and seeing them start to try to have children, it was like, what else are we going to do if we don't have kids? So now you're really faced with that. What are we going to do? And I also like knowing that you've been through this now, this 7 to 10 year changeover, which I always find noteworthy. I think they say all the cells in our body change over every 7 years or so, right? And people call it the 7-year itch I think that refers to relationships, but there's like the itch in life. I'm similar, that now there's like, not to say it's necessarily easy, but there's an easing in of like, this is how it always goes. There's upheaval, there's uncertainty.
Yeah, it's kind of weird how you don't get to really understand or assign meaning except in retrospect. And now to have a bulk of information and experiences. And you're bringing to mind something that was also, it was like the crescendo of the whole period of deciding and figuring out the family thing. So we buy this property. It's got a really crappy double wide trailer on it that was totally inhabitable and had to be completely revamped. So a nephew was with, this all relates. We're sleeping outside under the stars. My period's late. I've got my nephew here. I can't talk to my husband about this. My period was late. It was late. It was late. Every night I'm sleeping outside, looking at the stars, going, oh, what am I going to do now? And so had the opportunity to weigh the potential outcome all by myself, which was huge because I've also come to understand I'm highly influenceable, which I'd like to say I'm not, but I am. And so I had a full week to figure out what I wanted, not to what I didn't want, to figure out where I stood on both sides of it. And I was scared and I was a little overwhelmed. And then after we put Jason on a plane, it's like, okay, I got to talk to you about this. Went and bought a pregnancy test, and we didn't share what we wanted the outcome to be. It's just like, all right, let's just see. And it was negative. And I learned later I was starting perimenopause. But we both confessed to each other that we did not want to have it be that we were going to go for it. Of course, we would have adjusted to it, I think. Who knows? Who knows? That's just one of those things.
Wow. I don't want to compare your pregnancy test to the toss of a coin, but I like to joke with my clients, tossing a coin can be a great way to make a decision, not because you actually let it decide for you, but that moment when it's in the air. And I think about this period of time, these 5 days or this week as being the in the air moment. And then it lands, your gut will often tell you, based on your response to heads or tails or what you hope it shows, what you want.
Exactly. And the fact that I did it by myself first, I've learned that our first inclinations, of course, are most often the most valid and the most separated from all of the stuff around us. And then we go and we start checking things out and then get swayed this way and that way. And that's when the crazy making started.
Wow. Okay. Cool story. I have so many questions. Okay. So you mentioned something. You said, you said, I hate to think about being highly suggestible or influenceable, but I am. First of all, I think we all are. I know we all are. Most of us are. It's human nature. And I want to go back to something you shared about like our friends were doing it. So we thought, hey, like, let's just kind of check that out and do that. And I'm curious if you can speak to, again, looking back, having made meaning, who or what do you think some of those influences were that made you think, okay, well, let's just check out this path of becoming a parent. Like, let's go down that road. What do you think held the biggest sway for you that made you decide to pursue that?
The fact that I didn't have exposure to anybody that I was aware of who didn't do it. So it was more the absence of the option than I'm choosing between this and that. And that's why I think what you're doing is so important. And what I love about all the people doing the work in the childless, child-free lane is that now we're actually dimensionalizing it so it looks like something rather than the only picture that we have. And that's exactly the kernel that got me. I still do it, have flip charts on my wall with things that are goals. And I had, for one particular year, find 8 people that don't have kids and talk to them about it. And that's what I did. And all of a sudden,
hard?
Yeah, it was really hard. It was really because I had to listen really carefully, and then I had to figure out how. And it's interesting, some of the stuff that you sent me as prep, I used the exact wording that you did. How did you come to not have kids, if I can ask? And if it's too personal, just let me know. And sometimes I would share with them, oh yeah, I tried. Sometimes I'll say that. Yeah, I would say that. And then that would start one direction. I found that the people who chose not to have kids had the more actionable information for me. And I do think that I found almost the cliched attraction to, oh yeah, so then you just keep going along this twisty trail that you notice where you're peeling off on a spur to go a different direction. And I found that sometimes hard to listen to, but always helpful because it stuck a story back in my unconscious, if not in my conscious time to think about later. It's something to think about. I think so many people choose to not think about it and not make a conscious decision about, am I going to do this or not, which is, again, another reason why it's so important, the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I agree. You're welcome. Thank you for being part of it. I'm interested. You talk about, I'm interested in a lot, Kate. So let's see how we do with our time.
That's who you are.
You talk about now you identify, I think you said now you identify as a child-free elder. Is that correct? Or am I mincing your words? Okay. Now, when you first were unable to and decided not to pursue fertility treatments, did you define yourself as, or were you regarded as a childless person? And not just, I'm curious about how you felt about yourself as you shared, it was very challenging. How did the world regard you? Did people know you'd been trying to have a family? Did you say to people no? Okay. So it was a private.
I think 2 people knew that I was trying. The people at work thought I had cancer or some disease because I was going to the doctor all the time. No, I didn't tell anyone. And I think part of it was because the assumption was that I wouldn't have children. And my 3 younger sisters do have children. And so I was always kind of the other one in the family dynamic. And I didn't want the management of other people in something that I found not only deeply personal, but also just cumbersome and sex on demand and taking your temperature every day and all this stuff that was like, I'll do it, but I'm not going to live it on my day-to-day life with everybody in the universe. It wasn't me.
Yeah. That's fair. Okay. So very few people knew. Now, of course, again, people made assumptions that you wouldn't have kids. Maybe some people thought that you naturally would, you weren't able to, and just for, of course, this is like broad strokes here and not everybody subscribes to these terms. But when we talk about childless, we're typically referring to somebody who wanted to have children, who was unable to. And when we talk about child-free, it's usually child-free by choice. So there's a will or desire to not have children. You shared when we've spoken that that definition of yourself has really fluctuated and changed. And so when did you move over to that child-free side, if you will, or what's the navigation back and forth look like?
The navigation back and forth looks like waffling, but it also looks like mining the costs and the benefits from the paths. And I firmly believe that polarity of childless and child-free is really damaging. I think most of us live more in the middle space, and we gust this way and we gust that way. That happens over time. Today, if I say that I tried to have kids and I see what I recognize so readily now, that crestfallen, oh, poor you. And every once in a while I get a call from someone on Mother's Day. It's like, oh, I'm thinking of you. I know you'll be bereft. It's really hard for me to listen to because I, like everyone else, I'm dynamic, I'm moving, I'm changing, I'm growing. And if you're going to leave me in that space where, and studies have borne this out, where I'm pitied and you feel sorry for me, we can't have a relationship. If you move me over to I'm child-free by choice, then I'm living this slap happy, go-go life that I can do anything I want, which technically I can do pretty much anything I want. And that in some ways like a shameful confession. I can do what I want. And so then you see oh, you'll never understand me. And yet one of the gifts of the last couple decades has been that people who are not happy having kids are opening up to me, which would have been just crushing when I was trying to have kids. But now they'll tell me about, oh, the only time I know that my son is safe is when he's in prison. Or I just wasn't suited to it. I should have gone the path that you've been on. And that would have been crushing early. And over the last several years, it's been very empowering because the thing that has also surprised me is that thread of, oh, would it have been continues. And, holidays, it's like, oh, Christmas to have all the grandkids. I love watching my sisters with their grandkids flitting around. But I'm happy watching them with their grandkids flit. I don't know what it would have been like. I don't know the deep inner lives that they're leading. I do know that they're all dedicated to their kids. And my bandwidth is wider than that. And I have young people in my life that I'm very, very, very close to. And so I can... And I talked about going to the schools. I have had and will have young people in my life always.
Has that been important to you and something you've consciously cultivated, or is it just something that's happened?
Oh, no, it's something consciously cultivated. One of the most valuable friends that I made moving to the country was a Hawaiian woman who was 20 years older than I. And she had that Hawaiian vibe. Everybody loved her. And at her memorial service, we all got up and every person said, I was her favorite. So she made us all feel like we were her favorite. And she had 3 kids and she had, all that stuff. And I said, Pilani, how do you have all of us loving you? She says, well, I consciously try to have friends in as many decades as I can. And not my friends' kids, but directly they're my friends. So I took that to heart and I plot out, and I'm short on 20s right now, but I got 30s and 40s and 50s, 60s, up to 90s. And that is a very purposeful, meaningful, intentional process. And after we finish this, I'll probably go out and try to find some 20-year-olds. I don't know.
I was going to say, if anybody's listening, who are you looking for? Who are these people?
It's just we all need a place to go and be heard. And sometimes the things that we need to plug into are not in our contemporaries. They're in people who are older or younger than us.
Okay, so I want to tell you that once I made my child-free choice, everything was smooth sailing from there. But the fact is, that wasn't the case. Once I had decided, and once I was like 99% sure I was never going to have kids, I still really struggled to embrace a child-free life. I had doubts about the future. I was worried I may regret my decision, as everyone threatened I would. I worried about what might happen when I became old. And, I am not old and I may regret my choice, but I've actually really calmed a lot of my fears and worries on this front because of the work that I've done to become more confident and really embody my child-free choice. If you are pretty sure, you are almost sure, maybe you've already firmly decided that you are not going to have kids, but you want to become more confident in your child-free choice, I want to invite you to join Confidently Child-Free, which is my 3-month group coaching program that's going to be kicking off a new round in April 2024. and that's designed to help you go from shaky to rock solid in your own child-free choice. If you want details on how this program works, what it entails, head over to kidsorchildfree.com and check out the Work With Me tab. I will also include the details in the show notes of today's episode. It's not just having younger people in your life, it's also having those older people. And I'm curious, when we think about, let's say, the generation a step or two older than you, how important has it been to have child-free or childless elders, let's say women or people without kids who are older than you? Has that been more critical, or would that be something specific you've searched out or wanted, or has it just been any types of older people?
It's been critical, and it's been especially critical when they don't have kids. And again, going back to the child-free, it being the most meaty, sometimes the most charged information. But the very, very first time I acknowledged in public that I had wanted to have kids and was unsuccessful was it was a conscious eldering retreat. Okay. And I sat in this circle and said it. And then I said, I just don't know. I don't know what life looks like. And I want to talk to people who don't have kids. And 3 of the 12 people there did not have kids. One of whom is my friend Wendy, who I've written about, she's celebrating her 90th birthday in this spring. And she's in like my top 5 people that have helped me anchor my life. I can go and ask her about anything. She was widowed early, so when I was single, I had a chance to talk to her about dating and stuff, being an elder. And now she has balked at making plans for her life and her end of life arrangements. And I have kind of bugged her along the way because I'm a planner. You got to have all this stuff done. It's just what you do. And so she called one day and was just hemming and hawing. I got something I want to talk to you about. And I thought, oh, she's coming around. And sure enough, she asked me to play a role in her end of life care. And she's on the East Coast. I'm in the West Coast. I'm in Oregon. And so there are a lot of logistics we're working out. And the conversations that we are having now are not easy conversations, but they're frank, and by nature, they have to be honest. She asked me a question. I was like, whoa. And it was, well, how long are you willing to come and stay on the East Coast to help me out if I need you? And I had to think about it, 3 to 6 weeks. And I sat with that for a while and then followed up with her. And I said, I think that's so, but I don't know. But what I can say to you, so it's that kind of an exchange. What I can say to you is, I will be there. I am loyal and I am with you, and I will not leave you on your own. I will. And if you give me a list of people, which now I have, it's on my refrigerator because it's making me really zone in on this time is coming and I need to incorporate that in my life. So she has been hugely impactful. And then different people doing different things with their lives and how they've composed the phases and what they're doing, from land conservation to advocacy to working with kids in schools to all kinds of different things. It's inspiring, and it's also that's not me, but this is, or check out that, try that, drill down further like you're doing with me. It's so rich. It's so very rich.
Wow. I'm interested, if people feel like they want to have more of these intergenerational relationships, let's say they'd like to have younger people in their life if they've chosen or choose not to have kids, maybe somebody who at some point maybe, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you call it a child of your heart. Is that
Yes.
The relationship? I know you've shared, you've had this sort of, or have had a few of these types of relationships, these very, very close familial-like bonds with younger people. Or let's say on the flip side, they're really looking to have connections with an older generation. Again, maybe it's child-free people, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just something that's missing in their own life. Maybe they don't have a relationship with, let's say, their own mother, but they want to have children. They'd love to have somebody who can serve as that, like that next generation. What advice would you give them, or suggestions to like meet these types of people or connect with them?
I think the first of all is to know that it is a welcome query. We think, oh no, they would not. I mean, no, they've got other people. They got full lives. No, it is a welcome query. That's how I got to be so close with Pete Ulani, because I wanted to be close to her because I wanted to know what she knew. And so it's a compliment to snuggle up to the people who have what we're looking for. And we're all around. That's something that shocked me. When I started to put that lens on and look at the world, it's like, yes, younger people, they haven't decided yet, or they don't have kids, and it's like, how are you figuring out what you're doing? And what do you know about this? Or I have people that, like in my book group, I've got younger people that I remember working with them when they were starting on their careers. And I just kind of became someone that they could talk to. And it was important that I wasn't their mother. It was that perspective. And so just to ask, to notice, what is it that I'm looking for? Just like I did with Piilani. How is it that you have all these people of these different ages? She thought about it for a second and she answered the question. I'm just flashing on all these people. It's like a kaleidoscope of people. And what I think is different about living a life without having children of our own is that we do have the kaleidoscope of people. And the two that you refer to, the children of my heart, there's a son and there's a daughter. And I'm not in everyday contact with them. I'm often in contact with them when they're in crisis. They've met each other now, but they're not close to each other at all. They don't have a sibling kind of relationship. But because I've been there as a safe person, I think that's what I think of myself, as a safe person. They know they can come to me for whatever it is, and I will listen. There's been some tension on one side with the mother being threatened by that. And it took me a while. I thought, I've got to satisfy what her needs are. And it was so helpful when she got in my face about it one time. And it's like, I don't know what to do with this. And I took it in, and it's like, this is not my issue. There is enough love in the world to go around. If she's threatened by my relationship with her child, that's hers to work out. And so over the course of time, she still is struggling with it. And she's just toxic for me. So I just give her wide berth. But the daughter, I'm there for the daughter. I'm there for the daughter right now who's going through some major struggles. And I'm a different perspective for her that I know is valuable.
Yeah. You talk about this kaleidoscope of people in your life, and because of the fact that you haven't had children of your own. And I think we so often just think in terms of losses, the things we're missing out on if we don't have kids, specifically when we think about this like big, broad, interwoven family dynamic or, group of friends, et cetera. But it sounds like, if anything, there can be a different kind of richness. And I don't think, it's not maybe fair to compare one versus the other, but this idea that there's a lack, it sounds like there's such a fullness there in your life and also in the lives of a lot of these other people that you know.
I think I would characterize it as capacity. When you think about the hours spent raising a family, and I've got the numbers, it's like the 20,000 hour thing to become an expert at something. And you think about the resources that are wound up, which, not counting colleges, is over $250,000 per kid. The capacity to manage time, treasures, talents in the ways that best suit us is a huge boon, not only to us in our own personal lives, but to all the people that we touch, and that we can shift that capacity much more easily than if we had children. I know my partner now the phone rings, and I know he may be dealing with an emergency that's coming up. And my job, which has taken me a little while to figure out, is I'm here to support him. I have relationships with his kids, but I'm supporting him, and that they know I'm their dad's foundation, rather than I'm some sort of a quasi mom. I'm not, and I don't actually choose that role. And what I have been floored by is the value of that clarity, number one, but also the stability that provides both for me and for him. And figuring that out was on one of the flip charts for a year, saying, what the heck is my role vis-a-vis these kids?
I want to go back to this new relationship, and specifically the time in between, because for those who are filling in the blank, so to speak, Kate is no longer with Dan, who she mentioned earlier in our conversation, who she had initially been with, married, and attempted to have children with. And now you've got a newer partner. But before we speak about that, I just am curious to go back to this specific friendship you have with Wendy, this older friend of yours who you mentioned is turning 90 in the spring. And I'm interested to know, like, specifically where it concerns your later years in life, because what I hear from a lot of women who are thinking about staying on this child-free path is there's a lot of fear that comes up around aging without kids. And I'm interested if your relationship with her, if there's anything specific you've like seen or been taught or that you're witnessing through going through this with her that's been helpful to you or has offered insight on these later years in your own life.
Oh, I think the practicality and dealing with the basics of it. I had to go through all of my, arrangements and who were going to be my personal representatives. So I had already done that work before she did, which was kind of weird because I hear I'm guiding my elder through what the process is like, which was also super cool because she doesn't have any pride of place, as I'm your elder. But to go through the nuts and bolts. Who do I want to be there? Who am I going to, in my mind, burden with this role? When in fact, it ended up 3 of the 4 people who play a legal role in my future years do not have children. And then I have a backup group because the 2 people who are on my financial side are my contemporaries. So I'm going to need a second string group of people coming in. So I've identified who those people are. One has children and the other one doesn't. It's like not a pay it forward, but it's one of the ways that I demonstrate my love for Wendy is by agreeing to take on these roles. The reason I keep reinforcing that I will be there for her is I don't want her in her last days to be worrying about who's going to be there. And when I was writing my book, there was one in the chapter on elderhood, and there was something that happened. It's the only time it's ever happened to me writing, but I'm sitting and I'm writing, and it's about who's going to hold my hand. And it chokes me up to today. What I saw on the paper was that I would open my eyes and say, oh, it's you. I don't know who it will be. It could be somebody that I'm going to know. It will be maybe be somebody I don't know. And she's going to be okay. Wendy's going to be okay. And when you and I talk about these things, I feel like I'm providing a service to you as a way to a context within which to look at your elder years as well. And everybody who doesn't have kids, there's a pragmatism that comes with not having kids. And we avoid that, what I think is a huge potential pitfall, and have seen it play out, that your kids actually aren't there, or they're ill-suited, they're remote, all these things that make it more difficult.
I think there's a blessing in disguise there, in the sense that I do think nobody wants to talk about or think about end of life, but we're all going to get there eventually in some way, shape, or form. That's undeniable. And I do think not having children, for whatever reason, it forces our hand to think about and look at these things. And I think there's, with parents, unfortunately, a lot of assumptions made. And let's face it, whether or not you have great relationships with your children, if you're a parent, none of us know who's going to be there at the end, because we don't know when the end is. We don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know who's going to be available in that moment or those moments, right? I think it's an incredible gift you've offered and are offering Wendy. And it also sounds like it's a gift to you as well, being in this role.
Completely.
Wow. Okay. I promised we would get back to the divorce topic. Now, how long have you been divorced from your husband, Dan, your former husband, Dan?
8 years, I think.
Okay. I'm interested, some people, for example, Maria Coffey, who I've had on this podcast, her husband had an accident that was quite serious. And she said, I had this brief moment where I thought, I wish I had a child I could call, that person, that somebody else. And she said, I don't even think it was a real need that I had, or like a real wish that I had, but it was like something that came up that felt very primal for her. And he's okay and everything. But I'm curious for you, was there a point going through that separation divorce where you thought, oh, I wish I had children? Or did it not cross your mind? Or was it on the contrary, like, well, this is good, we don't have children? Has that played any sort of role?
I would say all of those things. I think it was good that we didn't have children, because then it didn't get all snarled up in their lives. I will say that the son and daughter of my heart, I learned later that they got together and said, should we be doing an intervention or something? Which, exactly, that was my reaction. It's like, wow, this is not just my perspective on this, that you share some of this view, and said that is about the most loving thing that I could imagine. And I think the infertility part of it and going through infertility treatments, when I go back and reflect, was a real pivotal point in our marriage that created a fissure that we didn't put enough effort into repairing.
Okay, interesting. In what sense? Because you said you both were relieved when there was that negative pregnancy test. So just the emotional upheaval of going through all that together?
Yes, and the fact that, things were happening with my body, and he didn't know how to support me with what was going on with my body, and he had to do silly, going and providing the semen, all this stuff that is just, it completely throws a cold water on the intimacy part of a close relationship like that. So we both pegged that was a fissure that did not repair. So those people who are going through infertility stuff, just give your relationship as much care and feeding as you can.
And you found love again later in life.
Yeah. It's like, what? Am I this person that gets to have this experience? And what also was shocking to me is going through all the online dating stuff, which it's like, wait a minute.
That's a whole other episode.
Yeah, it's a whole other. But what was cool about it is I didn't put the not having kids forward. I just left it as a void. But what I found is that it was more a positive than a negative. And again, it goes back to this capacity thing. Is I've got capacity and I've got a pretty straightforward life. So I don't add more moving parts. I'm like stable, which I'm stable. Okay, sure. But yeah, we're very attractive as potential partners if we can just figure out what our roles are and then have the guts to basically say it.
Yeah. It sounds like you have good communication too with your partner on that. Like the two of you navigating that, for example, with his kids, and like how you're going to be that support and foundation for him through those challenges, et cetera.
Oh yeah. And I wouldn't be with someone that we couldn't navigate and co-design what things were. That it's just, I would much rather not have that presence.
Well, I know for me, like sometimes I've thought it can feel like you're pinning your hopes on one person or relationship if you don't have children, if you don't expand, the traditional family in that sense. And I love this idea of like having second chances at love or third chances and like all the different relationships that can come in your life, obviously not just romantic. And that of course we can be scared. It's normal to feel some fear, but to know there's like so many possible lives and paths and relationships available to us, and you being a living testament to that. So Kate, I have so many more questions I want to ask you, but I do need to move to the rapid fire section of today's segment.
Of course.
I've got to go watch a show in the next 30 minutes. We're recording this. People will be listening to this in the spring, but we're just before Christmas, and I've got to jet out here in the early evening. So Kate, before we wrap up, I have 5 rapid fire questions that I love to ask all of my guests. Okay. So the first 2 are finish the sentence. Being child-free is?
Capacity and space.
Being child-free is not?
Unnatural, unwelcome, and negative.
What is one thing that you believe would make this decision a little bit easier for women who are on the fence about whether to have kids or not?
Recognize that even though you have to fall off one side or another, nobody gets everything, and you're going to be fine.
What is one thing that you would like women who are moms to know?
That we're just like you, only you had kids, and we have very full, nuanced, rich lives. And if you have an opportunity to be curious about how our lives work and what matters to us, we will very much appreciate you querying. And if people without kids represent about 20-25% of the population, could we have 20 to 25% of the conversation about us or not about kids?
So good. That's one of my favorite answers so far. All of that you just shared. Okay. And lastly, if you could give one piece of advice to someone who's currently on the fence about whether or not to have kids, what would that piece of advice be?
Look at trying to find a balance. It'll be hard to do, but find a balance between all of the input that you have from our culture and every resource, our families, about what life might be like if you had kids, with some very frank, balanced feedback about what life might be like if you don't. Just own the fact that you're trying to figure it out and that you need information and resources.
Well, we hope to provide some of those with these conversations like the one we just had today.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much, Kate. If people would like to connect with you or see what you're up to, how can they best do that?
Probably through my website. It's www.katekaufmann1f2ns.com. And the book's available everywhere. And that's the best.
Amazing. I'm going to link to your website as well as the book in the show notes. And I'd also, something I didn't mention, but I would love to also direct people to are the articles you've been sharing on Psychology Today, which I think are excellent. You talk about the relationship with Wendy, and you've been chronicling that, as well as, lots of other good stuff about not having kids. So we'll definitely send people to that as well.
Yeah. And actually the column's called Unapparent, which I'm very proud of because I think it's very telling.
I was going to say very clever, Unapparent on Psychology Today. And I will totally link to all that in the show notes as well. So thank you again, Kate Kaufmann, for joining me today. And I hope that you can come back for another conversation soon.
Absolutely. Great, Joy. Thanks again, Kelty.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. Now, if you enjoyed that conversation, if you're feeling fired up or inspired, or you have all sorts of newfound clarity on your own kids or child-free decision, I want you to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review so that other people who are on the fence about whether to have kids or stay child-free can discover the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. Thank you so much in advance for doing so. I hope you have a beautiful day, and I will see you back here soon for another episode of the Kids Are Child-Free podcast.